Gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce our poet tonight, Cecilia Hagen. She commented when she came in, Hagen and Hogan, two Irish. So Cecilia is the author of Entering, Airlie Press, 2011, and of two chapbooks, Fringe and Among Others. Her poetry, reviews, and nonfiction have been published by Rolling Stone, Prairie Schooner, Poet and Critic, Northwest Review, Caffeine Destiny, Blood Orange Review, and many other publications. Her work has won awards in residency from Literary Arts, the AWP, the McDowell Colony, Soapstone, Playa, and Passenger Magazine. Cecilia's work also is or will be included in public art projects at the Kaiser Medical Center in Hillsboro, Oregon, the Nursing Center at Lane Community College, and a parking garage in downtown Eugene. So I saw a presentation of that, and it's just a terrific presentation. She teaches poetry and memoir writing classes and studies tango. So would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Cecilia Hagen. Cecilia. So let me know if the mic is...
We'll see, do the mics work for me? They work for you. Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me here tonight, and I apologize. This is just the kind of thing my husband is not so fond of, but I thought the reading started at 7:30. So we come sauntering up, a little late. So I apologize for being late.
We're doing fine.
Okay. I won't be $1 short, just be 5 minutes late. Wait, it's so beautiful here, and it's got a really lovely feeling to this place. I appreciate everybody coming out. I never know if we start daylight savings time or we stopped it, but we just sprang ahead, whatever that is, because of daylight savings time, and that always kind of throws me off. And the animals expect to be fed at the wrong time, and everything is. So I have a little poem about that disorientation. You'll see many of my poems are about disorientation. This one's called Broad Daylight. I had high hopes for the daylight savings time, for what I would accomplish in that extra hour. I didn't designate precisely where my extra hour would go, didn't plan to squeeze 4 additional minutes into each of the 15 hours I'd be awake. I knew it would be diffused throughout the day, the way steam spreads through my house after I shower. As broad daylight laid itself out across the bed and turned the corner into twilight later than usual, I could feel the presence of the extra hour. It gave the day more languor than the day before. I made an elaborate dinner, chopping finely and creating a sauce from scratch. And as I cooked, I was still savoring the time to come, the better me that the change was sure to bring. I'm always optimistic. Yeah, I need a bigger lectern. So now we have a new pope. Does everybody know? I got to tell my brother, which was funny, years ago in the 80s. My brother lived in the Soviet Union for a long time, which is a long story. And I think he called. Oh, I went to visit. I went to the USSR, and he said, "Well, what's going on? Sometimes we see an old Time magazine at the embassy." But I said, "Well, there's a new pope," and this was back in the 80s, and there had been a pope who died like a month after. He said, "Well, I know that," and I said, "No, there's another new pope." So this pope thing is big. It's big in my family. And I didn't even know the Pope's name anymore, Benedict, until he retired. And I was like, well, this has happened before. What was it, 600 years ago? I mean, it's been really, it's kind of crazy. And we hear about the Pope's shoes, and he's not going to wear his red shoes anymore. Just a lot of Pope stuff, which, I don't mean to make fun of it. I know there are 1 billion Catholics, and, my father joined because he liked the music, and it does have good music. But I wanted to, so I have many of my poems. I went to Catholic school for 12 years, so it was a big influence. And so I wanted to start with a few of my sort of Catholic school poems. And this one's called Praying and Cursing. Praying or cursing. They go together. Well, it's confusing, which is what I'm... Holy Mother of God, he would say. And this was cursing. But when we said, Holy Mary, Mother of God, that was praying. Patty's father holding the steering wheel or a broken toy or a bottle of beer in his hand, muttering under his breath but loud enough. Or our class kneeling on wooden risers, moving rosaries between our chewed cuticles as we faced the figure hanging from 3 large nails. Praying or cursing, it was all talk to the saints and nuns and statues, all tongue speak, all of it moving in and out like the tides. Home from school, we changed out of our blue uniforms and ran like gulls on the sand-sprouting crabgrass that circled the carport, handing Patty's dad the wrench, the flashlight, the Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the other wrench, for Christ's sakes. We were praying for his soul, doing a kind of homework, learning about banging your knuckles and settling for what was handed you, shaking your head, your large ears almost flapping, your t-shirt gray with grime, like a soul that has been cleansed and cleansed and cleansed, good enough but never really good again, forever and ever, amen. When my mother would curse, I can't even bring myself to say it, but when she would curse, I'd be like, oh my gosh, forgive her, forgive her. And this one, well, I won't tell this story because I think it's all in here. But, you know, there is a little holy water font at the door of each classroom that you dip your fingers in and bless yourself. And this is called Filling the Holy Water. John, chip-toothed, long-haired, flirted with Sister Sylvia by offering to fill her holy water font. The half-moon bowls were nailed to the doorpost of every classroom. Entering, we would dip our fingers into them and bless ourselves, gaining time off for our time in purgatory, decreasing the certain punishment for our lengthening list of sins. John and my brother were fatherless, renegade boys who subscribed to nothing wholesome. They lit fires in pie pans when no one was home, defaced comic books, made up a religion based on bozo. So John, his blonde bangs falling into his eyes, replenished Sister Sylvia's holy water, much to her delight and the improvement of his biology grade, though she had no scientific way of determining whether he used the priest-blessed sacristy water or simply filled the font at the drinking fountain just down the locker-lined hall, at the white basin with wads of gum pressed against its porcelain lip, and a rusty stain seeping out from where the unholy water repeatedly touched the place everyone bent to, so empty of thought, so beautifully, whenever they were thirsty. I don't know if you can tell yet by the mention of crabgrass, but I grew up in the east in Virginia, where we had fireflies. So this little poem about them is called Glow. Luciferin lights their abdomens. Their smell stays on your fingers. It's like catching bells with the shells of your ears, like sex, though you don't know what sex is. Your mother calls you and your brother in for a bath. Oxygen in the water, oxygen in the air. The bugs pulse in the jar. No one thinks about stars, but stars appear. Did anybody else bathe with their siblings? Okay, yeah. Yeah, and then we started like, you go first and then you go, but it's the same water. That was not as fun. This poem, Renewal, my father was a Marine for a while in my childhood, and he got a different job, but he was at the end of his long career in the Marines when I was a kid. Renewal. I think crows must renew themselves with boot polish. They aim their silhouettes against yellow leaves and shoot their thick legs out, strutting for sustenance and style. I used to watch my father bend over the shoe jack bolted by the back door while he rubbed a towel back and forth over one of his dress uniform shoes. First he would spit in a tin of polish and swirl the paste with a rag-cloaked finger that he rubbed over the toe, the sides, the heel. Then came the quick swipes of his arms, buffing the surfaces until they gleamed. His back swayed with the work, and the doorknob offered me its tiny, surprised reflection of him. Under the utility room's bare bulb, the shoe would rediscover its shine as my father erased the flaws his week of steps had caused. And so I note the crows' drenched blackness, their thrushed and dudgeon. They work the yard like soldiers, policing their past wrongs, while I admire their beauty, their disregard. You know, they've been studying crows, and evidently they talk about us, and they like some of us better than others, but I don't think they really care that much about us. I think they're spending millions of dollars to make themselves feel better. The crows are watching us too. I don't believe it. The invention of safety. I had 2 jobs again and was considering a third, helping a harmless fanatic write some sort of patent application. Every time he appeared, he was trailed by a coterie of elves. This was part of his system. I worried he would talk my ear off, not pay me for listening, draw me into his murky world. My own children were home, buzzing like perpetual motion toys, wanting praise and attention, all manner of motherly things. Food appeared and disappeared the way of all food. The tires on my car were bald, the commute to my morning job dicey. An underpass, a sharp turn, a short on-ramp to merge into a furious swarm. At night, I told myself stories, radiant and detailed creations. Life was skittish, time was diamonds. I held sacred things in my hands. Maneuvering the underpass, one eye on my son, folding paper animals in the back seat, my daughter asleep beside him, I eased us into the stream of rushing cars, like a corpuscle of blood entering the veins of an unseen God. You can have a little section of newer poems here. Sometimes I write poems based on dreams. I'm sure you all do that. And I don't know. I think I changed them some. I'm not sure, but this was sort of perfect. It's called The Critic. I've written my lines in crayon on sheets of slightly wrinkled butcher paper. Someone has drawn large gestural swoops over them that obscure the words. Now an art critic is coming to appraise my work. If this critic is so important, why am I dressed in a smock, not even black, just casual, in the wrong kind of way? I'm also laughing a lot, made happy by a few comments. A doughy man wearing scrubs who alludes to one of my poems as he fingers the green cotton of his shirt, a signal I don't understand. And the woman who looks right into my face and recites one of my lines. The critic arrives a few minutes late with a bit of a retinue. He heads off in a different direction first to see a true art show, one with lots of red purchase dots and some blue dots to indicate that people are seriously thinking about buying those gorgeous horizons, shimmering with light and distant storms. When he's done, he heads toward the building where my work hangs, in a low-ceilinged rec room. I follow him across the lawn, my eye on the parrot his wife carries everywhere, my heart already whole, hopeful that I can get this feeling to continue no matter how he responds. It's one of those sort of goofy, happy dreams. And then I'm in an automatic writing group. I mean, we try to write automatically in the morning. It's just a little spontaneous thing. We get a prompt. We write for 6 minutes, and then we read them, and then we do another one. So, and it is interesting in the morning what comes out. This one's called After Boonwell. I forget which Boonwell movie there is, but there's one where people are stuck in a room, sort of middle class, bourgeois people like he always has, and this woman opens her handbag and pulls out a chicken foot. So I'm sure I was thinking of that. Nobody saw that movie but me? It was in college. I
remember only the eyeball one.
Oh, that was, yeah. After Boonwell, I left my ruby-crested flycatcher in my other purse, But here is the consolation prize, a chicken toe in my cell phone, stuck into the tiny buttons as if to indicate where the gizzard might dial up the waddle. Heavy as a Townsend's warbler while migrating, this migraine of half-seen truths and half-heard limericks, ravens I can't count, cardinals I can't see but remember. The mummified hummingbird of you was so beautiful, the desert defeated you completely. When the red-winged blackbird takes off, it's gone. Another one of those. Distance in relative terms. How many javelin throws from here to the dead bird's shadow, from here to the rising moon that makes the shadow sigh and shows how the feathers still lift with the wind? How many arrow flights to get to yesterday and locate the door to the day before that, when the sun shone so hot the people hid from it, when the rays nearly melted the dashboard of every car parked in the merciless lot outside the mall. Hard not to see distance in relative terms, this mile as your brother, that span as the disgraced uncle you never saw again, though you recall how he held onto your hand, even as the undertow tried to pound you down, how he carried you to where you could stand on your small feet on dry sand. Wanted to read a poem by my book, Entering, is from Airlie Press, and Airlie Press is now having its open submission period, March, April, and May. And if you live in a place where you can get to Monmouth once a month, I encourage you to submit your manuscript. And the guidelines, I have a sheet in here, so if you're interested, it's also on the Airlie Press website. But sort of standard stuff, and you don't have to pay to submit your manuscript, and then you join the press and do work for 3 years, and you get a book. And I wanted to read a poem from another Airlie Press poet, Carter Mackenzie. Her book, Out of Refusal, came out in 2010. This poem's called Dwelling. The bees were a noise above the bed, wings tapping the house, threatening to slip out. They lived in the chimney, its charred interior, but spreading to almost every room was a vague sound, like the distant hum of electricity. I covered the vents, listened to walls. Light fixtures collected wings. I saw their shadows at night above me, beating against the glass. I remembered an act of superstition or malice reported in the news, dead bees, dark feathery piles left for a beekeeper, poisoned hives. There were alternatives. I imagined their bodies, pollen-laden, making honey, delicate wax filling the crawl spaces. I could not walk inside without listening. When my husband heard that I was going to read for an hour, he said, "Are you going to read some other people's poems?" I know. Well, so I thought, well, I better do that. So I wanted to break it up a little bit. My brother, the one who was in the Soviet Union for so long, he and I did some translating together where he would, he speaks Russian very well, like a Bulgarian, evidently. That's pretty good. So he did what's called the pony. He just would sort of do the literal translation, and then I would make it more like poetry, and then we went back and forth. And it's really, I think it's just so perfect to do with a sibling because you have the same, you were taught language by the same people, so you know exactly what your language is doing. And we did a few poems by Sergei Yesenin, who was, he died in 1925. He killed himself. He wrote a suicide note in his own blood. So very Russian, very dramatic. And he had just turned 30. And then some people feel that first he was for the revolution, and then he was against it, and the Soviets didn't like him because he was such a reprobate. And I think in retrospect they're thinking that he probably had mental problems because he was married 6 to 8 times. No one's sure. I don't know. It varies, yeah, and 30. And he was really closer with his men friends, but the Russians don't want to think about that. But it's pretty obvious when you look at his biography. And he would marry one woman and have a child with another. He married Isadora Duncan briefly. She was like 18 years older. That didn't last very long. But the Russians love him. He's like John Lennon and Bob Dylan, and he's huge. There's a statue. There was a freighter named after him. They made a mini-series about him. He's very big. And Russian rhymes very easily. And so a lot of the translations of Yesenin, and they're not a lot, but a lot of the translations rhyme, and they're just very sing-song, and I don't think they convey, why would they love this guy? I don't know. So here's one of the translations that we did, and it doesn't rhyme. So imagine that I'm this 28-year-old reprobate who kind of looks like Russell Crowe. Didn't hurt. The parrot. It seems things will go this way forever. Towards 30, having raged our fill, even tough, hardened thugs begin to cling to our ties to life. Dear one, I'll soon reach 30, and the world means more to me each day. My heart has even started dreaming that I'm burning in a slow, rosy flame. So if I'm burning, let me really burn. When we visited that booth with the parrot, back when the lindens were blooming, I won a ring, a sign that we were destined to burn together. The gypsy put the ring on my hand, but I took it off and put it on yours. And now, when the squeeze box squeezes, I remember and still feel the shame. I picture you carefree and laughing, giving the ring to someone else. A hideous swamp seeps into my brain. A freezing mist surrounds my heart. Maybe you kissed him until dawn, and then he asked you about it, how you moved that fool of a poet to pour his feelings into verse. But what of it? Someday this hurt will heal, though not the lesson of life's sharp edge. It's not the first time a damn parrot has tricked a poor criminal like me. My brother told me that people in Russia will call in sick to work, and they'll say, well, I'm having heart problems. Like we would say stomach problems. I mean, they don't mean, heartache. They just mean, whatever, my cholesterol is high and I can't work today. Why didn't I think of that? So, because I was talking about my brother, I want to read this little poem I have called Brother. His hand on the sassafras tree, his foot on the swampy earth in front of me, he showed me how to jump across the ditch. He plucked 3 leaves, one slender oval, one mitten, one whose fingers split into a V. We peeled bark to get the smell, today something like courage, in case we slipped, lost a shoe to sucking mud, needed to limp home, leaning on each other, taking the long way around the lake. We lived at Norfolk is on the northern edge of the Great Dismal Swamp. It's pretty swampy there. And I didn't realize, speaking of lakes, I didn't realize that there was a Lake Oswego. That was so obvious. No one told me. I just thought it was, So it's great to see Lake Oswego. This poem is called Spelunking. Has anybody been to the Oregon Caves? Yeah, only you? It's kind of far from here, I guess. I mean, it's far, but... Inside the cave with its odd formations of time and climate closing in, I remember today is my father's birthday. I have failed him again. No, he will forgive me as I forgive him, because neither of us expects much from the other. Our guide, Wayne, his hard hat says, is teenage, deep voice, comic. I watch his lips and his Adam's apple, the wonderful opening of his mouth. This is just like my father, to think of any unlikely stranger, any glimpsed form as a possibility. His habit of craving is in here with me, pressing down with its tender inheritance. And what can I do but savor it, rolling it like a cat's eye marble in my pocket? Which of my children will acquire this, as yet unburdened by any idea of how absurd adulthood can become? Our group climbs farther down and laughs at Wayne's jokes, follows the deepening beam of his flashlight. I have one, he says, holding it over his head, and you don't. He turns it off, putting us in breathtaking dark. I listen to his voice describing things that thrive in the absence of light, as my pupils widen. It's really, this past summer we went to Luray Caverns in Virginia, and when they turn off the lights and you're inside a cave, you just feel it like, I don't know, like you just took a big gulp of helium or something. This little chapbook, Trap Rock Press, Eric Muller did this. And and this is the poem in the parking garage. I'm just so thrilled to have a poem in a parking garage. I always wanted to be on the bus, but I think a parking garage is even better. It's called At the Bus Stop. And Eugene, some guy in the city, some bureaucrat, they were having a competition about who can be the most innovative with their parking garage funds. And this is what he did. I mean, I'm not the only poem. There's 6 or 8 of them. One of Carter's, Polly Ann Peterson. At the bus stop, he bent to kiss her like a bee to a flower. His friend looked and looked away, skateboards jutting like single wings from under their arms. I was a passing observer. The kiss meant nothing to me, but like the sun going down and the wind coming up, it lifted me. And here's another sort of Catholic poem, because those photo booths, everybody that's ever gone to confession says that those photo booths are like the confessional. So it was just in my mind. Photo booth. I take my son by the hand and lead him into the booth. When the red light comes on, my sins are clear to the camera, while he shows his pure heart, his grin. When the curtain falls behind us, we're out in the dime store again, waiting for what develops. I'm still holding his hand, his sure, solid hand. He pivots on one foot, singing, "Macaroni went to town riding on a pony," while someone turns the sunglasses rack, reflecting us in lenses no one looks through. When the strip emerges from the slot, I see how my child smiles beside me, offering his absolution to the world, ready to take on the kingdom. I see what a pair we make on this strip of film, the shining glee, the dogged hope. Now they have some thing you step in and you like experience a hurricane. Have you seen that?
No.
I'm not going in. I've experienced a hurricane. And this one, dashboard. St. Christopher clung to the dashboard with the help of a magnet the same size and shape as his halo. The young Jesus sat high on his shoulders, growing heavy, testing the goodwill and strength of his carrier, who ceaselessly forded the river, staff in hand, while my mother carried us wherever we had to go. Lifting Oscar from his car seat, I think of Christopher, and oomph escapes my lips as I heft the weight of the boy who trusts me enough to test the waters of my strength. Every time we cross the river, he's a changed child, and I am a weaker vessel, but he doesn't know this yet. He's watching light make diamonds on water, leaves swirl down, and I see how my old protectors earn their crowns. My latest grandson, he's a big mimic, and so when I inadvertently go, ugh, when I do something, he goes, ugh. He's just experimenting. And then, so, that poor fool criminal you're saying, and I have in this little chapbook, among others, I have a series of clown poems where I just kind of, this idea of a clown just really came to me in a way that my other poems don't. I mean, it was like a coming in from the skylight or something. And over a period of a few days, I just got all these little clown poems in there. They're kind of embarrassing, but it's not me. It's a clown. And this clown's night off. Clown sits on her porch, admiring the red-faced geraniums. Shade and sun make nameless shapes, and breezes stroke the wind chimes, fan her hair. There will be no audience tonight. No moon-faced children tossing popcorn stars between their teeth. No crowding with her kin into the tiny car. A night off requires its own kind of preparation, a day of considerable rest, a twilight of pacing, then dark hours of shoving scarves and streamers into springs of tight surprise. Clown's dowry. A clown was born in America. So were her parents, her grandparents, so on. Each generation scratched the surface with a bent spoon, then moved to a different state. In this way, they achieve very little. When you work in the melting pot, you get rendered. Clown and Moses. Her child, a sad-eyed orangutan, watches Clown for signs of depression. He can smell snakes in the trees, can predict things to come, but can't name them. A beetle crawls across his foot, and he reaches to flick it off without taking his eyes from Clown's face. He brings the twig to his lips and nibbles pensively, recalling the story she told of Moses in the rushes, how he was taken in. He feels for her, feels love, feels a storm brewing. She never says no to him, but each of her sighs crosses his cheek like slaps. And then last clown poem, Clown's Gold Star. Clown's Gold Star. Clown got a gold star in her youth, so in her mind it never tarnished. But sometimes she feels its sharp points deep inside her, the gold juice of it leaking out. Can I borrow somebody's broadside? I wanted to read that. That was sort of a, many of my poems are this sort of almost pathetic, but people seem to like them. I mean, I really have a great life, but I write these poems that are, maybe I get out my angst in my poems. Reticence. I know exactly what's wrong, though I say nothing. Reticence is an art, surprising me as I fumble with knives and everything else, scarred from years of being inept and improving too slowly. I think of creamy Daphne opening the cold weeks of spring for her display of staying power, the ridiculous bravery of that scent, tangible petals opening an invisible letter. Me, I know so many meager things, when to be silent, when to go. Thanks, Charlotte. I just got a couple more. I've really been enjoying honey lately. I don't know. I got a jar of honey from a beekeeper friend, and it's quite different than, I buy good local honey, but this honey is even better. And honey. The honey is turning to sugar, as if to replicate the roughness of my tongue, or maybe the furry bodies of the bees it no longer hears coming. Light fills the liquid, a transforming sensation to be shot through with light, to be gold inside and out, like being in love before love has been made or even spoken about. This honey was churned in the humming stomachs of bees, was hived, sealed in, then spun from the comb, and now mingles with an apple in my mouth, as it did in Sappho's one sunlit afternoon thousands of autumns ago, when she, exiled, lacking her customary luxuries, turned to the consolation of this sweetness. Two more. I've written a few poems about letters of the alphabet. I have a Q poem about Q, which I won't read, but and I wrote one about X and Y. They kind of had a night out and got crazy. and now I have an I poem. It's called The I, like the letter I, loses its inhibition. And so ice, impossible unless ice skates. Even then, the indigo slip requires an isosceles of know-how, the ability to slip just so, eyed her down, icing the downfall. If the horizon could say just one word, would it be indolent, lying all day, hiding all night like an ingrate, sitting on its instrument, narrowing its eyes, indigent? And the id, that island of isolation, what does it want, ripening on the windowsill, watching Icarus splash off the coast of Iberia, denying injury? The itch is ignorant in an inbred way, and yet it persists, nibbles on squid ink crackers, and plots to plant itself like a rhizome after the island thaws. I want to close with a poem dedicate to my husband Craig, who drew this graphite
Wow.
image. Yeah, he does. It's really big. It's big, but he's an artist, and very nice to have an artist in the family. And we talk about art, but we don't do the same kind of art. So. Two worlds. Look across the river. The heron fractures its long body, relinquishing flight to stand on one leg and stare into the river. Because I see everything as parable, because you sit next to me, I try to reconcile two worlds, but can't. Our feet in the river illustrate how the water touches us, touches and hurries off. We know there's no stopping, no ceasing the eye with its attentive hunger or the body's appetite for flight. There's the Q&A and then cookies. Yes, Tom?
So you talked about this a little bit with the 6-minute writing that you're doing. But that's the question, when do you write and what kind of practice do you have?
My practice is very unadmirable. I wouldn't want anybody to, it's just sort of catch as catch can. But I'm in two groups. In that one group, Tavern Books, which is another excellent new little press in Portland, and they have some great broadsides, and they're reprinting some books from Princeton University Press, and they're doing a book. Well, they did a book of George Hitchcock's poems called 6-Minute Poems, because George Hitchcock was in this group with me before he died. He was the publisher of Kayak, and his widow is still in the group. But that's a nice one. And then I'm in a critique group that meets twice a month, and so I just sort of, every so often I get inspired and write a poem, and then it's like, oh, Monday night's coming up, and I look around or write a poem. And I wish I could say I got up early and wrote every morning. I don't. I will next year. That's my resolution always, write more.
Do you write prose as well?
I do, usually when I'm required to, or sometimes I write prose poems, but I wrote a little piece about George, well, not so little, for Northwest Review about George Hitchcock, and I wrote about some poets for Eugene Weekly Mag. I just kind of do sort of writing on assignment little things. And I did write some short stories a long time ago, and I teach memoir. But I feel like, I get my memoir in my poems, sort of, or if I wrote, I don't know, I might be working my way up to prose. I really like line breaks. I like the tension, so, I don't know. Yes?
How does it work with Early Press go? You spent 3 years?
Yeah, actually, I've done my 3 years, but I just hang around because I enjoy it. But you're there for 3 years. You go to the monthly meetings and you help with the books. So you help edit the books that are coming out. You help publicize the books that have just come out. It's it's sort of like if you like having ink on your fingers in that metaphoric way of just working with other writers to get literature out there. It's really, really fun.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, it's a collective, and it's the only collective in the Northwest, the only poetry collective. So we're proud of that. Annie here is a member. Her book's coming out next year. Annie Lightheart. It's a beautiful book. Questions about clowns or orangutans?
Yeah, scary clown.
Scary poems.
These two groups that you're in, were they established when you joined, or did you?
I started one. I started the 6-minute group because George and Marjorie they had something like that in La Paz, Mexico, and when we visited them, I participated in that. So I invited some friends so that when they were up here. But the other group was we have the Lane Literary Guild in Eugene because we're in Lane County, and they have some groups that you can just sort of plug into. But yeah. Yeah. Well, then you get to pick the people. It's scarier to go when you don't know the people, I think.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, as Cecilia said, we do have cookies.
Cookies,
Some
all
of
right.
them, some of them are St. Patrick's.
Oh,
St. Patrick's Day cookies, and we have coffee and tea, so
amazing.
she will be here, there are books here, and have some refreshments, and get a chance to talk to Cecilia.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Let's thank you.
Thank you.